Let's talk about Ishmael, a very important character in biblical history and also in the Quran. He was the first son of Abraham and Hagar, who was a servant of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Ishmael's story is linked to an incredible promise that God did to Abraham. Back in Genesis chapter 12 verse 2, God said, "I will make you a great nation, I will bless you, I will make your name famous, and you will be a blessing." This promise was great. Just imagine, Abraham heard from God that he would be the father of a great nation. However, before this promise was fully fulfilled, Sarah and Abraham thought they could help with the plan, and that was when Hagar had Ishmael. If you like learning more about stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm sure God will bless your life even more. Sarah and Abraham were already very old when God promised that they would have a son. Can you imagine? That made the promise even more incredible, because Sarah couldn't have children since she was young, and that made her very sad. They waited a long time. Abraham deeply loved his son Ishmael, the first fruit of his descendants, and this is evident in the request he made to God in Genesis chapter 17 verse May 18, "Ishmael live under your blessing." As a father, Abraham wanted the best for Ishmael. He was concerned about his son's future and perhaps imagined that Ishmael could be the person through whom God would fulfill the promise of making him the father of many nations. However, God had very specific plans. He explained to Abraham that Sarah, even though she was old and previously unable to have children, would give birth to a boy named Isaac. This son would be the heir to the special covenant between God and Abraham, a promise that included not only offspring but also an eternal relationship of blessing between God and Isaac's descendants. But God did not leave Ishmael out. He assured Abraham that he would also take great care of Ishmael. God promised to bless Ishmael, make him the father of 12 princes and make him a great nation. This blessing showed that even though Ishmael was not the heir of the covenant, he was still deeply loved and included in God's plans. This story teaches us something very important. God has a unique plan for each person. Sometimes what we want or hope for isn't exactly what God has in mind, but that doesn't mean he has forgotten about us. Just as he took care of Ishmael and Isaac in different ways, God takes care of each of us with love and purpose, showing that everyone has a special role in his plans. Baby didn't come. You can understand how distressed they must have been and even wondered, is this really going to happen? How is God going to do something that seems impossible? After waiting so long, Sarah had an idea. She suggested that Abraham have a son with Hagar, her servant, so that the promise could be fulfilled. And at that time, this was something common, because families needed to guarantee descendants to continue their stories. Abraham agreed, and Hagar became pregnant. But do you know what we learn from this? Even when it seems like something isn't going to work out, God always keeps his promises, in his time and in his way. Just trust and wait, even when it's difficult. Because of Sarah and Abraham's impatience in waiting for God's plans, the situation in their house became very complicated. Sarah began to treat Hagar, the servant who was pregnant, in a very bad way. So much so that living together became unbearable, and Hagar decided to flee to the desert, feeling alone, sad and with no way out. In the middle of the desert, where everything seemed lost, something incredible happened. An angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar. The angel brought words of comfort and a very special message. The baby she was carrying would be called Ishmael, which means God heard. This showed that God had seen all of Hagar's suffering and was taking care of her. The angel also said that Ishmael would have a special future, he would be a strong and blessed man. This message gave courage and purpose to Hagar, who returned to Abraham's house. And, some time later, Ishmael was born, fulfilling part of God's plans. The story of Hagar and Ishmael teaches us that, even in the most difficult times, God is always attentive and ready to help us. God had made an incredible promise to Abraham and Sarah. Even though they were very old, they would have a son named Isaac. But do you know what happened when they heard this news? They were surprised, and Sarah even laughed. She thought, how can this happen? I'm too old to have a baby. It was hard for them to believe because it seemed impossible. God, however, saw Sarah's reaction and asked, "Why did you laugh? Is there anything impossible for me?" This question made it clear that God was in control and that when he promises, he delivers, no matter the circumstances. And then, the impossible happened. Sarah became pregnant and gave birth to Isaac. His name means laughter, because it was reminiscent of that moment when Sarah laughed in surprise, but also because it brought a lot of joy to the family. That moment was much more than the birth of a baby. He showed that God always keeps his promises, even when it seems impossible to us. Sarah, who previously had doubts, now had her faith strengthened. Isaac was not just the son of promise, but the beginning of something much greater, a great nation that God had promised to Abraham. The story of Isaac teaches us that even when things seem difficult or out of our reach, God can do the unexpected and transform doubts into joy and faith. With the arrival of Isaac, Sarah's son, things in Abraham's family became complicated. Sarah began to feel uncomfortable with Ishmael, Hagar's son, and this created a lot of tension. One day, Sarah asked Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away. Abraham was very sad. After all, Ishmael was also his son, but God said he would take care of Ishmael and that he would also have a special future. Hagar and Ishmael went into the desert. There, things got very difficult. They walked until the water ran out, and they became hungry and thirsty. Hagar, seeing that Ishmael was suffering, placed him under a tree and, crying, walked away because she could not bear to see her son die. It was in this moment of despair that something incredible happened. An angel of the Lord spoke to Hagar. "What is happening? Don't be afraid." God heard Ishmael's cry. The angel then said that God had wonderful plans for Ishmael and that he would be the father of a great nation. Suddenly, Hagar saw a well of water that God had shown her. She ran, got water and gave it to Ishmael. With that, the two survived, and God continued to care for them in the desert. This story teaches us that, even in the most difficult moments, when everything seems lost, God is with us, hearing our cry and taking care of every detail. He never abandons us. God did an incredible thing to save Hagar and Ishmael in the desert. When all seemed lost, God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well of water right next to them. She ran to the well, filled her skin with water, and gave it to Ishmael drinks. After that, Hagar and Ishmael continued to live in the desert of Paran. Ishmael grew up to become an excellent hunter, very good with a bow and arrow. He was strong and knew how to adapt to desert conditions. Hagar, like a caring mother, found him an Egyptian wife, beginning a new phase in his life. The Bible says that Ishmael had 12 sons, and these sons became the leaders of several Arab tribes. This shows how God fulfilled his promise to make Ishmael the father of a great nation. In Genesis it is written, God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert of Paran and became an archer. His mother chose a wife for him in the land of Egypt. Ishmael's story teaches us that, even in difficult situations, God is always present, caring and guiding each step of our path. He transforms the impossible. Ishmael's life in the desert shows how he always counted on God's blessing. He chose to marry an Egyptian woman from the tribe of Juram, which also highlights how he had cultural connections with the people around him. Another interesting detail that the Bible tells is about the marriage of Esau, son of Isaac. He went to Ishmael's house and married Mahalath, who was Ishmael's daughter and Nebaioth's sister. Although we don't know much about Ishmael's adult life, the Bible mentions some of these important moments, such as his family and cultural ties. The Bible tells that Ishmael and Isaac, two brothers on their father's side, came together at a very special moment, the burial of Abraham, their father. Back in Genesis 25, it says that they buried Abraham in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, which was near Mamre. It was in this place that Abraham and Sarah, his wife, were buried. This shows that, despite the difficulties of the past, the two brothers were together at this important moment. Later, the Bible also talks about the death of Ishmael. He lived 137 years, then was gathered to his people, a way of saying he rested and joined his ancestors. Ishmael's descendants, known as Ishmaelites, grew to form a great nation, just as God had promised to Hagar, Ishmael's mother, and to Abraham. They are remembered as nomadic people who lived in the desert near the Arabian Peninsula. For this reason, the name Ishmael became famous, being mentioned several times in the Bible. So, did you enjoy knowing more about Ishmael's story?